Unit 9. Analysis. When investors decide to buy physical goods, they follow a direct approach. This approach provides the purest exposure to the commodity's price, but involves a cost. When investors buy commodities, they need to understand the quality of the goods and the problems that can exist if that quality is lacking. Another problem is the presence of different costs relating to storage, insurance, and cash opportunity costs. These costs affect the management of the physical good. As a result of the disadvantages of direct investment, investors typically prefer to indirectly assume a position in commodity markets to avoid the problems linked to the management of physical goods. Practice 1. According to natural law theory, moral principles are not simply the result of human convention or social agreement, but are based on fundamental principles of nature, including human nature. The term natural law refers to a set of ethical and moral principles that are thought to be inherent in the natural world and applicable to all human beings. These principles are considered to be objective, universal, and immutable, and are often seen as a source of guidance for human behavior. Natural law theorists believe that the natural world operates according to a set of rational principles, and that these principles can be discovered through human reason and observation. They argue that these principles provide a foundation for moral and legal systems, and that they are binding on all individuals regardless of their cultural or social background. Critics of natural law theory argue that it relies too heavily on unprovable assumptions about the existence of a divine purpose, and that it fails to account for the diversity of moral beliefs and practices across cultures and historical periods. Practice 2. Most academic writing involves constructing an argument or supporting a position about some question or topic. This requires clear organization with all your points directly connected to your argument or position. In Western academic writing, a linear style is preferred, where one point leads directly and unambiguously to the next, with little room for digression. The organization will depend on the purpose of the composition. A literary critique will have a different structure from a chemistry report. Part of learning a discipline is learning the writing organization appropriately to that discipline. For example, academic papers in my discipline, applied linguistics, usually have sections: introduction, literature review, discussion, conclusion, which are typically signposted with headings that make the organization of the paper explicit. Practice 3. Habits are part of our everyday lives, and therefore, when we don't clean our teeth, eat breakfast, have our morning coffee, or have biscuits in the afternoon, we feel unsettled and a little bit stressed. This feeling is unpleasant, and we quickly learn that it can be avoided by carrying on with our habit. Therefore, not eating biscuits feels unusual, but this can all be made okay with a few biscuits. And the habit carries on as it becomes the solution to the problem created when trying to change it. It's a vicious circle, but it's the change in the habit which makes us feel stressed, not the absence of the actual behavior. And if we start to realize that the feeling of stress or worry is just withdrawal and will only be made worse in the longer term if we give in and use the habit to get rid of it, then we can start to break the habit itself. 서술형 practice. You might notice that if you compare two products with the same function, but in very different price ranges, you'll tend to find that the more expensive the product is, the more likely it is to be sold in a way that emphasizes how it makes you feel rather than its inherent function and properties. There is a huge economic advantage to creating this feel-good associated value, which is a product of advertising and often advertising alone. The economic advantage is simple to state. People will pay more for this extra kick. This might seem like trickery. The consumer is fooled by the advertiser into believing that the product is more than it is and is induced to pay more for it as a result. But the advertisers may well argue that these added associations create not just apparent but real added value for the product, that they change the consumer's experience of the product into something more. 논술형 practice. We seem to have developed a visual language of facial recognition that influences our emotional judgment of people, before we are even consciously aware of what those things really mean. And because it's evolutionarily wired in us to do this, there's no escaping it. Humans are such a social species that it makes sense for us to be able to quickly assess if someone is friend or foe. The problem, though, is that our snap judgments and prejudices are often wrong. People with chiseled jaws aren't all competent, and round-faced individuals are certainly not all trustworthy. Professor Alexander Todorov from Princeton University explains that, perhaps because we're now exposed to so many faces, our visual cortices have gone for the simplest groupings and attributed certain features to certain personality traits. But as a result, we're susceptible to the worst type of visual stereotyping.